Chapter 2, My Learning Curve. The sun drops in the orangey pink sky and the crickets begin their song. Every swamp critter joins in a farewell song to the sun. Soon the owls and the bats will be on the prowl, so I hunker down in the tall, wet grass and wait. Suddenly, room 26 is as bright as daylight. I leap up just in time to see a tall man with what looks like a piece of moss above his lip pull something on wheels into the room. Oh boy, I must have been daydreaming because this place isn't anything like a swamp. No owls, no bats, no grass, no sunset. Just a tank on a classroom table in Longfellow School. But I know this man because he also came into room 27 every school night. "Be of good cheer because Aldo's here," he says. "Hello again," I greet him out of habit. I think all he hears is boing. "Hey, I know you," he says, "the frog from down the hall. What are you doing here?" Of course, the furry fellow chimes in. "Squeak, squeak, squeak," and Aldo answers him. He even knows Humphrey's name. Does he speak hamster? I realize the name sounds something like the bullfrogs would say. "Rum, rum, Humphrey!" Aldo pushes a round red thing into Humphrey's cage. "Have a tomato, pal," he says. Humphrey gulps it in one bite and his cheeks puff out. "Whoa, I didn't expect that." Aldo says he's sorry he didn't bring me something, then sits down to eat his dinner. He talks while he eats, and Humphrey squeaks and squeaks some more. I can tell he likes Aldo. And Aldo has big news. He just got married. The furry fellow squeaks back at him and does a triple somersault. He sure is excitable. It's amazing to watch the man clean the room. Sweeping, dusting, and polishing, he's as graceful as a dragonfly and as busy as a bee. Before long, Aldo is gone and the room is dark again. I wait and listen. The furry guy got very quiet. At last, it's peaceful in room 26 until scritch, scritch, scritch. The scratching sounds are very loud. I hop to the side of my tank that faces Humphrey's cage. What in the swamp is he doing? I stare at him for a few seconds and then I get it. He's writing in a teeny tiny notebook with a teeny tiny pencil. Scribble, scribble, scritch, scritch, scritch. This little ball of fur can write? Where did he get his notebook and pencil? How did he learn to do that? For a hop, skip, and a jump, I am a little jealous. Of course, my webbed toes wouldn't hold a pencil very well, and a notebook wouldn't last long in my tank. Maybe he's just showing off. But at least he isn't as noisy as George. He doesn't call me bad names, as far as I can tell. I decide to go for a nice soak in my bowl and let the water soften the scribbling sounds. It works. But I wonder what Humphrey is writing. Is he writing about me? If so, what does he think about me? After a while, the soft swishing of the water washes all those thoughts away, and I can float, doze, be. I soak for a bit, then leap up to my rock. The ticking of the clock seems much louder than before. In fact, it's almost as loud as nighttime in the swamp. At dusk, the bullfrog chorus begins. Yep, I remember it well. Rum, rum, we are the guardians, defenders of the swamp. Rum, 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 rum. We love to live in the weeds. Rum, rum. We are the hero frogs, protectors of the swamp. Rum, 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 rum. We love to sing of our deeds. If you ask me, it's not much of a song. Defenders of the swamp? If Chopper, the big old snapping turtle, so much as hisses at them, the bullfrogs hop away from their beloved weeds and disappear. I've seen it happen. I run away too, because none of us are a match for Chopper. But at least I don't pretend to be something I'm not. The next morning, Mrs. Brisbane calls out her students' names. In turn, each replies, "Here." This is so helpful. I know all their names now. AJ is the one with the wide smile and very loud voice, but he's much nicer than a bullfrog. And Saya is the girl who doesn't talk much. She's as sweet as honeysuckle. Art has something in common with me. He likes to stare out of the window and daydream. I wonder what he's thinking about. Heidi is the girl who blurts out answers in class. She reminds me of Albert, who calls out questions all night long. Who? Who? He hoots so much, after a while I think, who cares who it is? Seth can't sit still. He's as wiggly as any water snake. And Mandy complains, like the peeper frogs. They never let up. It's peep, 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 night and day. Someone important stops in to greet me. I met him once before in Miss Loomis's classroom. His name is Mr. Morales, and he is the school principal. Apparently, a principal is a very important human. He's wearing a tie with yummy-looking dragonflies on it. I never saw a tie before I came to Longfellow School, but then I'd never seen a backpack or a chalkboard or a human up close. "And how is your new pupil adjusting?" he asked Mrs. Brisbane. "Very well," she says. The principal peers down into my tank. "Hi," I boing at him. He laughs. "I hear George has quieted down quite a bit since Og has moved," he says. That must be a great relief to Miss Loomis. As the morning goes on, I can understand the lessons, especially the one about frogs. Mrs. Brisbane puts up a chart with lots of pictures. Bing, bang, boing! I know those things. It shows eggs, tadpoles, froglets, and a very handsome green frog who looks a lot like me. The students listen quietly, and even Humphrey doesn't squeak or screech his wheel while Mrs. Brisbane talks. I can't believe my invisible ears. Mrs. Brisbane makes learning interesting. And there's no George to interrupt. I just wish I understood Humphrey. All I get from him is squeak, squeak, squeak. Most of the time, he's in constant motion, but sometimes he disappears into a funny little hut to sleep. At least I think he's sleeping, but who knows? When he's awake, if he's not spinning his wheel or squeaking his head off, he climbs up the side of his cage. Then he leaps, though not quite like I do, to his tree branch and drops down to the bottom of his cage, which is covered with something soft. If the bell rings, he hops on his screechy wheel. If a student asks a question, he goes squeak, squeak, squeak. If Mrs. Brisbane writes on the board, Humphrey climbs on the top of his cage and hangs by one paw. If I could talk with him, I'd tell him to take time to stop and smell the water lilies, float, doze, be. When Mrs. Brisbane talks about frog facts, her students are amazingly interested. I'm not sure that Humphrey is even paying attention until Heidi asks a question and he scrambles to the front of his cage to listen. "Where did Og come from?" Heidi asks. "From an egg," Mrs. Brisbane answers. That sounds right, although I don't remember that part. Heidi shakes her head. "No," she says. I mean, how did he get to Miss Loomis's class?" "Ah, I see," Mrs. Brisbane replies. "That's a good question. I'll ask her." She goes on to talk about how I like to eat crickets. Mrs. Brisbane makes a face as she tosses one into my tank, and I grab it with my tongue. The big tads are very impressed. I'm hoping for another cricket when the girl called Mandy reaches into my tank and picks me up, without even asking. It's a surprise, but not a pleasant one. Then she loudly complains about me when I pee on her. I don't mean to, it's just that we frogs do that to protect ourselves when a stranger grabs us, and it works. Mandy drops me right away. She complains about other things too. Earlier in the day, I heard her complain about a girl named Tabitha. Mandy complained she tried to get her to play, but Tabitha wasn't friendly. "Maybe she's shy," Saya said. "I was shy when I came here first because I come from a different country, and I was embarrassed that I didn't speak English very well." "You were shy," Mandy agreed, "but you were always friendly." Soon Mrs. Brisbane stops talking about frogs and starts talking about numbers and subtraction, but I don't understand a lot of what she says. Here's what I know about numbers. I have one head. I have no tail, 0. I have 4 webbed toes on my 2 front feet and 5 webbed toes on my back 2 feet, which make me very strong and able to leap really high. The most flies I ever ate in one sitting, 11. And there are hundreds of singing bullfrogs back in the swamp. Way too many to count. What else do I need to know? While the teacher draws numbers on the board, I slide down into the water bowl. Time to float, doze, be. A little while later, Mrs. Brisbane catches my attention again when she reads something and talks about rhyming words. Poems are new to me, but they turn out to be a lot like the songs I like to sing, without the music. Rhyming words is easy peasy. Hey, that rhymes too. A few days later, the big tads groan when she tells them they have to write a poem too. They start to work and there are more groans because some of them are writing about Humphrey and they can't think of anything to rhyme with his name. There's nothing that rhymes with hamster either. I am lucky that og rhymes with frog and log and bog and all kinds of wonderful worlds, and I am starting to understand them all. At the end of the day, I nod off until I wake up to the awful sound. Screech, screech, screech. It's Humphrey, spinning in that wheel. The students are gone and we're alone again. Suddenly, he leaps off his wheel and flings open the door to his cage. Before I know it, he's pressed his hairy face right up against the side of my tank. Get a load of those wacky, wiggly whiskers. Squeak, 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 squeak. He looks right at me and squeaks his tiny lungs out. I know he's trying to tell me something, but although I've picked up a bit of human talk, I still have no idea what he is saying. Whatever I say, I know he won't understand me, and I don't want to jump and scare him again. So I just smile. He keeps squeaking for a while, but we are getting nowhere. I am as frustrated as a nearsighted dragonfly trying to land on a twig on a windy day. I guess Humphrey is frustrated too. After a while, he gives up and goes back to his cage. Sorry, buddy, I mutter, but I don't think he hears me. When Aldo comes in to clean, I'm very grateful for the tidbit he tosses into my tank. Mrs. Brisbane asked me to give you this, he says. Enjoy. Bing, bang, boing. I'll say I enjoy it because it's a cricket. It tastes frogalicious and I am very hoppy. It isn't difficult to make me hoppy, really. Thanks a lot, I tell him. He just laughs. Later that night, I hear Humphrey scribbling in his notebook again. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Why do I feel as if he's writing about me? After a while, he's quiet. There's a nice light shining through the window, kind of like the moon perched on a post. I feel content, and before long, I'm asleep.